So RAN was founded about 25 years ago, and we were really founded to protect forests, essentially. And as the years have gone by, we've continued that really important work of actually stopping the trees from getting cut down. But about 10 years ago, we realized that that work was going to be more or less meaningless if we didn't actually address climate change too. So now we're both working to keep fossil fuels in the ground, to stop climate change, and to stop the trees from being cut down. So that's how I see our two pieces of work. Because actually climate change is one of the biggest threats to forests, and conversely, forests are one of the most important ways to solve the climate crisis. So in both of those pieces of work, we string through with a really important commitment, or a deep commitment to human rights. So it's all community-based and looking at what communities need around the world in order to be able to develop in a good way that's consistent with the needs of the earth.
How did you become an activist, and how did you find your way to RAN?
How I became an activist, I think I could probably trace it back to when I was about 12 years old, and I grew up in British Columbia, and my next door neighbor, my best friend's father, was actually a logging contractor, so he built roads for logging companies, and one summer he took us on a trip to go hiking in far northern British Columbia, and he took us in his little four-seater prop plane. And I had always thought that BC was this incredibly wild forested land, and all I had seen was from my small hikes and parks and so on. And when we took off out of Vancouver and went over the coast mountains and looking down, and suddenly realized that British Columbia was this amazing wasteland of clear cuts, it was this real wake-up call to me as a young woman, girl really at that point, that all was not as it seemed, and that actually there was a lot of devastation right behind these little strips of trees that I found out later are called beauty strips. So if I was to project forward how much longer forward is that? 25 years at least. I would say that part of what drew me to RAN and the work that we do is that the essence of our work is really looking at what is the root causes of environmental destruction and climate change, and how do we pull back the corporate greenwashing or the corporate facade that often is laid over very destructive practices. So what we do is actually say, okay, we've got trees being cut down, we've got climate change happening, how do we trace that back to which companies are responsible, and particularly which U.S. companies are responsible, so that as a U.S.-based organization, we can actually have leverage to really pressure them to change the way they do business, change the way they define doing business. One of the things I think is at the heart of really good activism is giving people tools to affect change that they can actually see how their actions are affecting change at a big scale. Because a lot of times when we're talking about breaking America's addiction to coal and oil, for instance, that is such a huge task that the average person just says, I don't know, there's nothing I can do about that. But if you look at it, so when we developed a strategy of looking at financing, that actually gives every single person in this country, more or less, has a bank account. Most of them bank at banks that are also funding coal. And so that gives them a very direct relationship with a part of the problem that they can really start to affect change. So in the case of banks are tremendously vulnerable. Their brands are really important to them. So if you have a lot of customers that are banking customers saying, I'm really concerned about the way my money is being used to finance coal, it actually is a very tangible way. It gives the banks motivation to do something, and we've actually seen it work. And we ended up in the last year or so, all the major banks that were funding mountaintop removal mining, which is one of the forms of mining that's portrayed in the film, which is horrifying and devastating, all committed to phase out their financing of mountaintop removal because individuals participated in a campaign that basically said to the banks, we don't want our money used for that. To me, art and activism are two parts of a very important whole, and film, I think, plays an incredibly important role in inspiring people and reaching audiences that may not normally be attracted to activism or to particular issues. And I think particularly as the quality of particularly documentary filmmaking has just skyrocketed, so that stories are becoming, they're really fun and engaging to watch. And I've certainly find that in our work it's really useful for training activists, for bringing people into campaigns, and for educating our targets too. When we go up against a big corporation, it's helpful to be able to say, watch this film. Because ultimately, social change at its heart is about communication and connection with people. and that's something that's really in evidence here.